Right, good evening everybody and welcome to this Resources Scrutiny meeting. The main purpose of this meeting is to review and scrutinise the Council's budget. I'd start off by checking whether we have any apologies for absence. Joe?
Councillor Hopkins has given his apologies for this evening.
Right, okay.
Can I offer the apologies for Councillor Nicola Beach?
Oh, right.
I know she's here on this side, but she's unwell today, so she can't make it.
Okay, thank you, Craig. So that's actually preempting my next point, which was, if I may, just welcome Craig, Dan, and senior officers who are here as well as part of this process. Appreciate your time. Before I go further afield, just check whether members have any declarations of interest. No? Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, they've been circulated? Yep.
Yes, they have.
Everybody happy that I sign those as a correct record? Yep. Okay, thank you. Now, just in terms of Chair's business, just really to set the scene for this meeting, I can't quite remember how many 100 pages the budget went to. I'm sure Craig could tell us. We can't scrutinise every page of the budget. So what we've tried to do is identify the areas where we believe there are potentially the areas of most interest and areas where there are most issues. And we've identified those and we're splitting them over 2 meetings. So the first meeting today, second meeting a week today, and we've tried to split it so that we are only requiring officer attendance as much as possible at one of those meetings so that we're not tying up precious time any more than we need to. Now, the items we've identified for discussion today were the capital programme, the housing revenue account, although I just emphasise that it was also the capital aspect of the housing revenue account because there's been so much consultation happening this year on the rest of the business plan for the housing revenue account, the growth and regeneration directorate and reserves, and at our next meeting we were going to look at the people directorate, and that included adult social care, dedicated schools grant, resources directorate, and general questions relating to savings both in this year and in the budget year. So that's the split that we are aiming for. Now, just to reiterate, I don't want to limit questions. On the other hand, I do want to finish everything on the agenda by the time we have to leave this building, ideally between 7:30 and 8, and if possible, even slightly earlier than that. So I'm going to ask you, please, if you can, to focus your questions. I'll go around and give people a chance for a couple of questions. If you take too long, I might miss you out on the next round. So let's just try and see if we can make that work. Equally, if there are really burning questions, something you need to say, I don't use emails during a meeting, but if you want to resort to an old-fashioned, pass me a piece of paper with a note on it saying you've got a burning question, I will make sure that I come to you. So everybody happy with that general outline? So item 6 is public forum, and I've got public forum here. Yep. So we had public forum questions from Joe Booth, who is not here, and statement from Joe Booth, and we had a statement from Emma Harvey, and I don't see Emma Harvey here either, so we note those comments and then move on. Now, I think the biggest challenge, I recognise officers and Craig have got a challenge tonight. I think Joe's probably got the biggest challenge of actually trying to work out how to minute this, in the sense that we've got a whole series of papers listed and we're going to discuss a whole series of topics that are in a different order to the papers. So please bear in mind we'll try and keep to some sort of order. We'll do that because at the end of the day, we want to come up with comments to submit with the Cabinet papers, or the Council papers for Budget Council. So we will try and keep some consistency. But if you do need to refer to papers, can you just remind us which paper it is, so that we can find the right pages in the Council papers? I do recognise that a lot of these topics are interlinked, so it may well be that we do stray a little from one to the other. So, and the final point I should make in sort of introductions as well is that we've submitted a whole host of questions to officers, and Denise, thank you to you and your team for the very detailed responses that we've had as well, because that helps us to understand. And I remind members the idea was that we asked the initial questions so that we were able to go into a bit more detail today on issues we wanted to raise. So the first item we're going to take is the capital programme. Who would like to start with some questions? And those questions, I'm guessing, will be substantially for Denise and Stephen, but can be directed at others as well. So who would like to start the ball rolling? I was not expecting this. Martin, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've actually got a more general point, but it relates to all the parts of the budget documentation, and this is kind of, because it's very difficult to navigate. It's a request for next time. I think it would help everyone concerned, public members and so on, if there was cross-referencing within the document, the whole bundle of documents. So, you know, there are points about the capital programme, points about revenue, points about savings proposed, points about, revenue minimum provision and so on. There are lists of proposals from members of the Cabinet under their portfolios, but they're not cross-referenced to where in the document they apply, and sometimes they apply to several places in different parts of the document. So I just think it would be wonderful if next time we could have a more connected document.
Martin, if I had to guess, and I'll hand over to an officer to respond, but I have to guess officers would like that as well. If only they had another 3 months in which to prepare. Is my guess at the answer? But would one of you like to comment on that?
Yes, I will do. So I think obviously we've tried to respond to the questions with an appropriate answer, but the questions themselves aren't specific to a area within the actual budget report. So we've obviously tried to pull together the information based on ensuring that we give you a comprehensive response. But in future, if you want us to try and link it to a specific area or element, then we will seek to do that. But I think it needs to follow, the questioning also needs to follow a similar format.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the point was around the actual budget document itself, though, so where we've got the savings proposals in Appendix A, I think. How do we cross-reference them back to which lines in the budget that impacts? I think that's the point. I guess, I mean, based on how this year's budget went, we were working very late on the very last day to get them published. So it's been a very challenging year because of COVID and the lateness of everything. But it is a good point, and I think we'll take it away and see what we can do next time. Yeah.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah. Heather.
I won't leave you hanging with no questions. There's a line, a fund or project in Capital, which is the decarbonisation pipeline. And I'm just wondering whether there was the option of more projects, or in terms of the work that's coming forward in decarbonisation, was there potential for more work? And is the limiting factor the amount of capital that we are borrowing, or the amount of work that we could do in that area?
Stephen?
So I think you're referring to the 19 million that's in there, of which the bulk will be on decarbonising our estate, and then there'll be on our fleet and other things. Clearly, that's just one element of the decarbonisation funding. There's an £80 million sum within the Hra programme for decarbonisation there. And that also excludes potential future bids. National government is clearly, still looking to put money in, and we provide match, which obviously is a great way of unlocking further money. We've got a good track record in doing that over the last years. And finally, of course, with City Leap, the procurement ongoing, one of the key points there is that the arrival of a private sector partner gives us an opportunity to put our match in alongside potential government money and private sector investment. So there's a lot more we would expect to see in terms of delivery. But in terms of the amount, the 19 million, that's clearly been selected within a constrained overall capital budget.
So I've got a question, probably because I'm new to this whole budget making process. It's about PL17, which is entitled the Resilience Fund. 1 million of the £10 million port sale, which just seems to be zeros, and I'm just wondering why it's actually included in the budget if it's zero.
Glenn, that might be one for you.
I'm happy to respond to that one. The reason it's in there is, if you look on the far left-hand side, we've also got the any costs or budgets that are in for the current financial year as well. And that scheme has got, I think it's 47,000 in for the current financial year, albeit for the future years there isn't anything. So that scheme's due to come to an end this year.
Right, but what's it used for?
That's something I don't know off the top of my head.
I can take that one if you want. So the Port Communities Resilience Fund came out of the sale of the port under George, and an amount was set aside to be spent by the residents of the areas impacted. I think it was Avonmouth, Sharehampton. Right. So there was a whole sort of almost like a neighbourhood partnership process where people, the community came together and bid for funding for various things that they did locally. So it was, I can't remember the total, but it was £1 million in the last year, definitely.
And is that the same for the investment in market infrastructure and buildings, PL36, which has 387 allocated for this year, but nothing for the next 5 years?
So I suspect it's the same reason, but obviously that was investment in St Nick's and Harborside and everything.
Right. Thank you.
Yep, Tim?
Thanks. This is, in terms of capital pressures and the questions that were asked about that, we're obviously bringing in this new way of working to try and make sure that we spend our capital budget rather than having a huge array of programmes and then finding that we're not spending the money. This year, it looks like inflationary pressures and cost pressures are going to be enormous and could quite possibly have an impact on that. Do you think this new way of working, are you going to be able to prioritise which of the projects will go ahead if the inflationary pressures are such that they all start to look like they're going to overspend?
So Stephen, I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, very happy to. It's an evolving and improving situation in terms of the way we are trying to manage and monitor both the projects and the overall programme. So you're right to say that year on year we tend to underspend, and that was an issue that we have tried to address in part through bringing in a capital strategic partner to get us that extra capacity and expertise when and where we need it. And in terms of the overall inflationary pressures, so you in effect might see historically a programme that didn't spend at the pace you wanted, but what we're now seeing is the pace is picking up. We think it's improving. There's still a long way to go. But on top of that, as you say, projects are becoming more expensive. So the way that we're looking to address this is across a number of different areas, really, one of which is making sure that we put really a great level of focus on the contingency that we put into a project. We need to err on the side of caution at all times and be more and more vigilant about that and more consistent. And then within our own sort of operational model, we're doing a lot more work around the stages, that projects go through. Some recognisable to anyone who's worked in that type of industry. You need to be quite rigorous and transparent about moving projects from the various stages of the business case through to execution. So we're constantly looking to improve that. But the overall pressure is, as you say, with supply chain, materials, etc., is building. And it's not just us, it's everybody who's looking to get capital projects delivered in the UK at the moment, and probably in most places in the world.
And do you think, sorry, just as a follow-up, what would you judge to be a successful sort of percentage of spend this year compared to sort of previous years? What are you aiming to get to?
So I've been looking to next year, and I've been setting my team a target that says we need to try and get to close to 100% by 23-24, because we are on an improvement journey. But it's not just about the number; it's about the quality. Because partly, if you get your numbers wrong at the beginning, the cost might go up. You might then think, well, I'm spending more, so I must be doing well, and actually you're getting less. So clearly, it's not a simple picture. But overall, what I've said to the team is, by dynamically reforecasting, by being realistic at the outset on the resource, taking account of the pressures that are coming through, we must be targeting at some point, not this year and probably not next, but within 2 years, to get to that sort of elusive 90 to 100%. That's what I've told our capital strategic partner. They're working on ways to get us there, but we will not get there, in one go.
Thanks.
Stephen, can I just come in there? I know that the Bristol Beacon gave all of us, and you in particular, a lot of heartache. But presumably a project such as that must be under significant pressure from inflation. I know there were various attempts to tie down contractors, but I would imagine the cost of production and the cost of labour will be putting that under pressure. Do you have any feel for what may happen with that project?
It's too early to say. Everything is kept under constant monitoring. Bristol Beacon, which is the subject of a value for money audit coming, so you'll hear more about that through the year. But where we are now is, the project management gives us excellent visibility, real granularity. We know what's happening there in terms of the operation. The nature of any project where you own the building is that ultimately until the final brick and beyond, frankly, because a lot of the negotiation with big projects can happen after you've finished. You'll see retentions are a big feature as well. So you can end up having conversations on big projects that last for months and years. So what I can say is the project is being really, really well managed, well monitored. But as you know, there is a risk around all these projects, particularly a historic building. But I mean, like house building as well, there are pressures everywhere you look. Our job is to try and manage them and keep within the overall cost envelope.
Thank you. And Martin.
Thanks very much. Some of the proposals are kind of harder to sort of understand, but there's one listed for parks, but identified as Councillor Cheney, saying be businesslike and secure more external resource. Then it says review local community infrastructure levy allocation criteria. And then it says the details are review the allocation criteria to release additional funding for parks and green spaces. That's where the connection with parks is. And from 2023 year to 24, it should save 100,000. Now, the allocation criteria for community infrastructure levy that is local is what's legal and what the area committees allocate. So is this proposing to take money from area committee funds to spend in parks? Because the area committee might have voted something differently. In fact, we're out consulting kind of imminently to our communities for what they would like, the available funds, the only available local funds that we have. Might be in their park, but it might be a safe crossing to school or something.
Yeah, so I think the idea is to replicate a similar thing that Bristol Tree Forum does, for example, which is to put bids into across the community, across the, I was going to say neighbourhood partnerships, but the area committees, to get funding out for parks in that sense. So it's still it's an ambition, you know, it's a target. It's not a guaranteed income source.
Okay, I understand that, and it says it's subject to consultation, but I don't see, unless the area has prioritised that, it's not going to use its local SIL for that, is it?
Well, no.
So how does that bring extra money in?
It doesn't bring extra money in, but it will be using SIL in a different way. So if we were able, as Bristol Tree Forum does, for example, to put a bid into each area committee for an improvement in a park, and those area committees agreed that they were happy to fund that. Now, it's as it says, it's subject. It's not an approved and agreed figure yet.
Okay, I'm slightly puzzled. So implying, say, the Parks Forum comes up with a load of bids and puts them to the areas. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
If I follow on from Martin's comment, and I suspect we're thinking the same thing, is we're in the same area committee, which has very limited funds. So I think that...
Of course, but there are some with a lot, and it's a £100,000 target across the city in a year, so it's not...
No, but I'm just putting in a plea, really, that there's quite a number of area committees that can't do all the things that they want to do. And so it's only a plea that it can't be right that the parks in those areas also don't get funding because there isn't enough funding to do the things that the community wants. So really just a plea that there's got to be some way of fairly distributing the availability of monies for parks. Yeah, thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at RE01 ICT refresh program, 1.64 million. Is that enough to get rid of all of our Windows 7 and Windows Server 2012 deployments so that we'll have none of them left next year?
So I think that's the last 2 years of spend on that program. So yes, I think so. I think it's what we've agreed. I'm racking my brains. I think is about right, isn't it? That is the money that's left for, yeah.
So there'll be none left by this time next year?
That's a more difficult question. I think there are a couple of apps that we struggled to migrate to Windows 10, to be honest, and there's also, it's not been easy to get every laptop back off everybody. Right. But otherwise, yes. That's the goal, yeah.
Thank you.
Tony.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very quick question about capital funding for the general fund and source of finance. Looking at the source of funding for 2022-23 and then comparing it to the previous year, there's a substantial increase in the amounts that are coming from grants. And I wondered, is that reflective of the situation we had with COVID where grants have been brought forward into this year?
What page is that on, Tony? Sorry. What page are you on?
Unfortunately, I printed it out and it didn't give me the page numbers. But it's just sources of capital funding or general funding.
Off the top of my head, I think just generally, a lot of the schemes that we've got in the capital programme are funded by grant, particularly grant through WECA. And those would be incorporated in there. I don't think they're specifically in relation to COVID. No, they're general grants that we'd have to fund capital schemes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at PL27, Vehicle Fleet Replacement Programme and Bristol Electric Vehicle Centre of Excellence. I noticed that there's nothing scheduled in for the years 24, 25 and 25, 26 and 27. Is that a commitment to say that all Bristol City Council's vehicles will be electric or zero carbon by 2024?
No is the answer, I think. So that's the prior. There was a program project we took through Cabinet a couple of years ago, which that's the spend. There'll still be still be more to do. So, if, for example, in the 19 million decarbonisation fund, some of that will go to fleet replacement as well. But there are still things that we're struggling to replace, the bigger vehicles, for example.
Okay, so that's in another line item, is it? The vehicle replacement fleet.
So as Stephen mentioned earlier, there's the 19 million pound decarbonisation fund. I think 2 million or 4 million of that is for decarbonisation of the fleet too.
Right.
Above and beyond that, which is previously agreed funding.
Okay. So are we online to replace all our vehicles before 2030?
Go on, Mike. Yeah, go on if you want to come in.
I'd have to check about what percentage we've reached by 2030. I think we're close, but not absolutely. And this partly reflects what the scheduled programme for fleet replacement was anyway. Because to be frank, it doesn't necessarily make sense just to go hell for leather for 100% replacement. But I think perhaps it would be worth getting some more detail for you on that. I think by 2030 we think we're pretty close, but I couldn't stand here today and say it's 100% by 2030. It partly reflects the schedule for replacing the vehicles. And there are some specialist vehicles that at the moment there aren't vehicles in the market that can do the job that are electric. So it's probably not 100%, but I think we're quite close. But we'll get that figure, Chair.
That'd be useful, thank you.
Yeah, mine's just related follow-up. Considering there will obviously be a decreased revenue cost if we have electric vehicles in terms of reducing money on fuel. I remember that there was a cabinet decision last year that was about replacing fleet, and some of them were hybrid even at this point and not electric. So even ones we are replacing, I understood, were not electric last year. Is it not cost effective in terms of the ongoing investor save and revenue to move everything to electric? And yeah, does it not pay back the capital expense? We'd be really interested to see those sort of calculations, especially when we have made decisions to not get electric at this point.
I think the bigger issue at the moment is there simply aren't the vehicles in the market to do the jobs that we need the vehicles to do. Remember, these are just not general vehicles. They have specialist jobs. A lot of them have specialist jobs for the council. At the moment, the electric vehicles simply don't exist at an affordable level. But your general point is right. And as soon as it reaches that point, then we need to consider that.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a general question which you might not be able to answer, but you might. Bristol obviously is a large port city, you know, even though it's a lot of the port is sort of nice to look at, if you like, but we don't get a lot of revenue from. Have we got any idea, comparing ourselves to other, say, core cities that don't have that kind of infrastructure, have we got any idea how much it costs us as a percentage of our capital budget to maintain the kind of crumbling structure of our port compared to, you know, somewhere like Leeds that clearly doesn't have that kind of infrastructure to keep going? Again, any idea what level of our capital spending we wouldn't have if we didn't have to maintain that?
So I think you mean, if you're referring to the harbour, a piece of work, you know, has been done, and there's been some initial work done on the infrastructure deficit, frankly, over, you know, decades. There's a big backlog of improvements needed. There is a piece of work going on right now. We've received some good news from the Environment Agency, who are going to help part fund some of that essential work, and that will form part of a sort of early phase of the River Avon flood defences. So, as I say, we have some technical work. We are looking to try and address some of the immediate issues. In terms of an overall cost to completion, it is probably better to come back when we're going to be due to coming back anyway with the flood defence updates, because it will obviously form part of that work. But it is an asset, but it's one that costs the council money at the moment to maintain. So we need to catch up, and we need to find a way of future-proofing it as part of our wider flood defence work.
And I don't think we've probably invested as much as we could have done. So if we were to say it costs us X amount more per year now, that probably wouldn't be as fair as if we'd done what we should have done previously. So as we go forward and we start to have to spend more to deal with the kind of backlog of things that we need to fix, and that might be a truer reflection, which the Harbour Review should do.
Yeah, my follow-up was kind of going to be whether there are sources of help for cities like ours that have, that kind of infrastructure to maintain.
So we put in the strategic outline business case to the Environment Agency, which came to Cabinet in March last year, and that sort of starts the sort of the process. I think we've said, the overall River Avon flood defence capital cost is getting on for 218 million. We already have, in effect, earmarked, or we're working through to get a part of that funding from through DEFRA. And where we go next with that is to build both a delivery plan that includes the harbour, which will include the harbour, but include St Philip's Marsh and Netham Weir and all these other places. And we're looking to pull together basically a funding strategy for that whole piece, and working closely with the Environment Agency, with WECA and other organisations. So it's a key priority for the coming year.
But as always, it's one of those, you got to bid into a grant pot. There's no kind of consistent funding that you could rely on. You could build a long-term strategy around. It's always, bid into this pot and you might get 5 million, get a 10 million over that,
David?
A question of clarity on GRO1, Strategic Property Temple Meads Development. Is that really actually Temple Island as opposed to Temple Meads?
So what was the reference number?
Station, are you?
What was the reference number?
GRO1.
That is not, I don't know whether it includes Temple Island, to be honest. Temple Island is funded by economic development funding, so
right.
we can come back to that. It should be listed as Temple Island. If it isn't, then that may be an error.
I'd be interested to know what you're planning to spend nearly 40 million on.
Well, there are programs of work, particularly around things like the Grosvenor Hotel, Engine Shed 2. Are you able to? Glenn might be able to confirm what's in there.
I believe it includes Temple Island, but also the station approach and some of Temple Quarter. So it's the EDF funded schemes.
Right.
So it's two sets of things. It should properly say Temple Quarter rather than Temple Meads. We're not building the station, as you say, David, but we are doing quite a lot of work around it, which is subject to that scrutiny session next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two contrasting items to draw attention to. So there's PL15, Environmental Improvements Program, which is an ongoing budget over the next 5 years, or 4 of the next 5 years. I'm not clear what that is, but listed on the same page under Housing Delivery is Strategic Property PL34, Community Investment Scheme, and that's a one-off payment in the coming year of £850,000. So in terms of the latter one, why is it one-off, and what is costing £850,000 for Community Investment Scheme? And then the other one, how do we know what the ongoing programme is for 4 years of the Environmental Improvement Programme, PL15? I
can answer both of those. So the improvement program, EIP, is a sum of money that is available to, in effect, support enhancements on a scheme-by-scheme basis. So effectively, it's available to and used for developments that are, on their way through the process. So it's drawn down. It's a delegated sum, which is drawn down to add, small enhancements at local scheme level.
Okay.
And the sum that relates to community investment, PL34, is the Lawrence Weston community scheme, which was, I believe, brought to Cabinet some time ago.
Oh, so that's a one-off?
Yes.
Okay, it would have helped to know that. Okay, thank you.
Another clarity question, please. PL09, which is Highways Infrastructure Bridge Investment. Which bridge is that? Or is that many bridges?
There we are. So we think it's Redcliffe and Plimsoll, but if not, we'll confirm. But Redcliffe Baskill Bridge, which was subject to a delay because the supplier went insolvent last year. So there are two bridge projects, but we can confirm if that is wrong, we'll correct that. Okay, I'm being told it's definitely right. So it's Redcliffe and Plimsoll Bridge.
So where's Jail Ferry on this list? Or is it not? Is it out of scope?
So Jail Ferry, we'll have to get back to you. It may well be that it's third part. I don't know where it is, to be honest, David,
Okay.
but it will be in here somewhere. We will come back to and confirm.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question in terms of Gorham Homes? And I recognise this might tread on things that are going to Osm in a couple of weeks' time, but it's just trying to understand the comment about it not being in profit until 2025. And I'm assuming that Gorham is building homes either for the market or to sell to the housing revenue account. Is that a fair assumption?
So the Gorham model is effectively a mixed tenure model. So it typically, well, the number varies, but it may be up to 50% affordable, depending on the market conditions. And the HRA may or may not be an acquirer, or it could be an RP, a housing association. So obviously, as you say, there are some issues we need to be mindful of in terms of not preempting Gorham's own board and business plan, but they are free to sell homes to whoever they wish to. But we have, I think, elsewhere identified in the draft HRA plan a couple of sites that are Gorham sites that are on the pipeline for the HRA to acquire. So, it would be normal to expect the HRA will acquire some of them.
So then I think what I'm asking is a technical question probably for Denise, and I don't expect an answer today because it may take a bit of time to resolve, or it may be just to correct my technical misunderstanding. But if Gorham is building homes on a long-term contract, would it not be accounting for the revenue uplift as it goes and therefore generating a profit?
No, the way that it works, I can speak because I'm aware of the deal that's currently being put together around Romney, is you typically get a you would enter into a sale agreement, and then there would be some form of down payment. So at that point, the first payment will be made, and then there are payments right the way through. So typically, I think it's typically a 10% payment when the sale agreement is started. Is done, but that's a very normal way of doing things in the development world. In terms of any commitment of the council prior to that, there is no forward commitment being made. We're not acquiring sites for the HRA alongside Gorham developing a site. That's a separate transaction. So until recently, for example, we hadn't signed off the deal to buy those sites for the HRA. So it would have been premature to make any accounting provision, I guess.
For as the project progressed, rather than at the end of the project. So that was why I was trying to understand. But can I suggest we leave that and perhaps you come back to me, because I don't...
No, I think the key point is that the financial model that underpins the sort of programmed of works assumes actually that any sort of profits from the phased sales will be reinvested to reduce the amount of working capital drawdown. Mm-hmm. So the profitability will come at the point when no additional working capital drawdown is required for that work stream of projects. So it is built in at the time when it's released, but actually it would reduce the amount of loan being required from the authority.
Okay, but if I move on to my other question is relating to Bristol Heat Networks, because I can't understand why we are allocating investment to heat networks when I understood that was part of the City Leap arrangements, and yet we have capital allocated to heat networks in the course of 22-23.
I mean, the two things are, first of all, the Bristol Heat Network Limited, as you know, is a requirement of the HNIP grant that we set up a special purpose vehicle, and we have to have a plan that enables us to complete that work, so not to preempt the outcome of the procurement effectively. So obviously, subject to the outcome of City Leap, we will then revisit the whole programme, because the assets, as you quite rightly say, would then be transferring at whatever point in time that deal was made. So we've put in an assumption to not preempt the decision of the City Lead procurement.
Thank you. Now, if members are happy, I was going to suggest that we move into the HRA capital part of the capital programme, but we can still come back to further questions if you have them. But it just seems to me that it might make sense to move on. Are members happy with that? Or Tim, did you want to come in? Okay, well, come in and you have the last question, and we'll move on.
I wanted to ask about transport, the transport budget. We regularly hear that the amount we spend on transport and capital is pretty much all revenue that we receive from government that we then spend out on transport, if you know what I mean. So we don't spend our own money on, we spend money that comes in from government. Is that right? Does that cover the whole budget? And if we decided that we wanted to spend more than we receive from government, is there a reason why we couldn't do that? It's not ring-fenced, is it, in the same way as the HRA and other things are?
There is a small amount of money the council has spent in some years of its own on transport. The vast bulk is handed across recently. Block funding from April, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which flows through WECA. What we will be required to do going forward is provide match funding. I think across the board, roughly 20% is what we're required to come up with. That's actually quite a large amount of money overall, and I don't think there is a particular issue within strategic transport of unfunded projects today that are deliverable, because a lot of the issues around these projects is they're long term and the delivery takes a long time. Where there is always a question is on the repairs and maintenance. Last year full council approved a slightly increased budget for basically patching up and fixing bits of the city. We still have a big backlog there. There is a small amount that typically is allocated towards that. The vast bulk comes from outside. I know the team would love it if there was more money, but every year we have to choose the most urgent schemes and only focus on those priorities. And there are many schemes that the team can't get to because of the funding constraints.
So I was just thinking, if you look at this year, the Bristol Beacon obviously stands out as a huge amount of money. If that amount of money wasn't being spent, which hopefully it won't be every year for the next 10 years, is it that some of that money could have been spent on our own transport priorities, or is there something that stops us from doing that?
No. I mean, we can spend our capital on anything we want. There's no kind of ring fencing around it. I mean, I guess there's WECA comes into this conversation somewhere in the mix, don't they? Because they're technically the kind of strategic transport authority. But yes, we could spend any money. We could spend all £900 million of our capital programme on transport if we wanted, but we probably wouldn't achieve lots of the other ambitions that we have.
Thanks, Jeff.
So, can I perhaps follow on from that with a slightly delicate question? But given that the papers that came out for the WECA committee meeting on Friday were only circulated shortly, 5 days before the meeting, can I ask if we have incorporated within the figures we have here the projected allocations that are reflected in those WECA papers? Because I don't know what level of communication there has been with WECA in those papers.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but they won't come through our papers, will they?
There will be a mixed approach. So where we have already received firm commitments, then they will be factored in. So potentially, for example, the block transport grants, etc., those would have been confirmed and they will be factored in. Where we have a specific scheme that's gone through our own governance process, then that will be factored into these figures that we've noted in our capital programme. But there will be some areas that haven't as yet been factored in.
But just to be clear, where we're making an assumption in here, whereas something is signed off, we fully expect that to be maintained, because business cases in development within the WECA pipeline are not the same as ones that are contracted. So we are not operating at risk on the basis of commitments being made in here that are not backed by high levels of confidence that the money is there, either agreed in the business plan or near as. And we have constant dialogue with WECA officers about that.
So, for example, the number 2 bus route consultation, which I understand is now rebranded as the Strategic Stockwood to Cribbs Causeway Transport Corridor, which is in the WECA budget papers, which is grant funding us to carry out that work. Is that reflected in this capital programme, or is it in addition to it?
So where we will have had to have got approval to receive a grant, it will have been shared, that will have gone to Cabinet. If things are a business case stage and have not got to that point, then no. So we use the decision pathway to ensure we track precisely what's approved and what's not. I can't tell you exactly what the situation is with that one, but we can obviously look into it, but that's the principle.
And in terms of budget setting, that's a kind of a passport and through us, isn't it? So does it impact so we could take that through monthly budget monitoring reports as a received new grant almost?
So I think probably this is more a personal plea from help from me, but it's probably from Tony, who was sat in on the WECA meeting yesterday as well, to officers and Cabinet, is actually we could do with a bit of guidance on this and understanding, because it's simply something where we need to understand the dividing line between a Bristol initiative and a WECA initiative, and where issues should rightly be scrutinised, and who has to be held to account. And I'm not trying to say that in a confrontational way, but as someone who I think is reasonably informed on these things, I am struggling to work out where the responsibility lies, and it would be really helpful if we could, if I think Bristol members involved in scrutiny could have a little bit of guidance and support on that, so that we can ask the appropriate questions in the right places.
Chair, can I just have...
Yeah, please, Mike.
So in terms of the most recent set of WECA papers that have been published, I think it's fair to say that they are proposing for the committee to decide on Friday decisions about future allocation of funds that potentially change previous assumptions. Now, it's not a risk of the kind that I think you were first postulating, and Stephen and Denise are giving answers to that, because where there's been a binding grant offer from WECA, those have been embedded in our budget assumptions, and there's no reconsideration of those in the recently published WECA papers. But the WECA papers do propose shifting future resources from different categories of spend, which is something that we haven't had chance to properly consider. And I guess, you could say that in the absence of the chance to have that conversation, we might have made different decisions going forward about how we would choose to use our own capital. It's kind of the point Tim was making. What we choose to do with our own capital partly depends on what we are assuming other people will fund. And if decisions are being made that we don't have the chance to shape or influence, then it's less easy for us to do that. But it doesn't jeopardise specific projects that are in the budget, if that helps explain it.
No, and I think we all see that if WECA is a source of additional funding to enable us to do things, then we've just got to maximise the ability to do that. So if we move on to the...
Sorry, Chair, can I raise a point of clarification on that, please? It's to do with the CRS bid and WECA, because I understood it was dealt with in the capital programme on paragraph 1310, where the CRS TS bid is specifically discussed, that Bristol gets £191 million and would be contributing £38 million, and that would be coming from the Clean Air Zone. So am I reading this conversation entirely wrong? Because I'm expecting the Clean Air Zone to be the major contributor to the 20%.
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but it is the case that the revenue generated by the Clean Air Zone is anticipated to provide a significant element of the match funding. There there has been a changed assumption in the CR-STS paper, which is actually about where the funding for mass transit is coming from. It doesn't affect anything about the internal integrity of the CR-STS paper, but it does raise a question which is concerning us about potentially where the funding for mass transit might come from going forward. But it doesn't undermine the integrity of what's in the SR-STS.
I think I'd probably just add to that in terms of the point that both Stephen and I made is still correct in terms of the decision pathway and when things are entered into our capital programme. The difference with the CRSTS is that there needs to be a submission to the department and we need to have approved our match funding to support that submission. Hence we've incorporated the potential match into the budget now so that when we make the decision we can confidently and robustly stand behind the submission to government.
Thank you.
Right. I think we will move on to housing. Now, it seemed right that we looked at the Hra Investment Program, not least because it comes to £1.3 billion over 10 years and therefore is a matter of significant materiality. And in fact, the other point that I raised with Glenn after this was presented is that I was slightly baffled that the housing revenue account proposed capital spend was actually equal to the housing revenue account financing, and there is in fact there was a detailed table that actually shows how that 1.3 billion is split between the various headings that are above it for its own financing. In other words, coming from grant, capital receipts, developer contributions, and borrowing. So there is a lot more information there, but it just seemed to me that it was such a material sum that we ought to have a chance to raise questions that we want clarification on in terms of that proposal. So who'd like to start with some questions on that? Nope. Such a large sum, no one knows where to begin.
Sorry, Chair. So are we just talking about the spend? We're not talking about the revenue side of it? Because I think that's what you're saying is it's all the spend is capital.
My suggestion was that we concentrate on the capital aspect of the HRA because so much of the business plan has been scrutinised. And this seemed a very significant figure in the capital strategy. And therefore, having a little bit more understanding about it or a chance to raise any questions. But if we have none, we don't have to raise questions. I'm just wanting to give members the chance to do so.
I do have a question.
Yeah, good. I'm really pleased to hear that, Tim. Carry on.
In terms of our programme, you know, it's great to see that we're looking to become one of the biggest council house builders in the country. Fantastic. I was just listening on the radio today about the problems, social housing problems in Devon and places like that, for instance, which are horrific. And, it's not going to be dealt with by central government at this point in time, so great. It's my understanding that everything that we're planning to build over the next 7 years, I think it is, we have a pipeline for that already. So is that right, that we think we know where that's going to be built and how many already? And my supplementary question, which I apologise for making it a bit local, but is the Brislington Meadows development in that part of that pipeline? Could you tell me?
So on the substantive point, yes, that they are. The pipeline is there. On Brislington Meadows, I don't know the answer to that question. I looked at Donald. Sorry.
No,
Donald.
it's not.
Oh,
it's not.
Stephen.
Sorry, I was just referring to the appendix there.
Brislington is not. Sorry, Donald, but I recognise the question and it isn't. But
yeah. I'm sorry, Councillor, could you repeat your question? Because I'm finding it really difficult to hear.
Oh, I was just saying that if we've already got a firmed up pipeline, did that include the Brislington Meadows development? Because as probably everybody here knows, there's pretty much
Appendix.
overwhelming support within the council now for that not to go ahead, but it may still go ahead despite that. So there's a potential there for 100 or 80 council houses, I think was the agreement. So I was wondering if that was factored in, or if it goes ahead, whether that would be additional.
Councillor, we draw your attention to Appendix 3 of the report, which lists all the current approved schemes at paragraph A, numbered 1 to 11. And then if you see the sites which are approved, planning construction anticipated over the next 5 years with a value of 64.62 million, you will see there is another list of 16 developments there. And then further on down, we list the developer-led schemes which range from Baltic Wharf, Hengrove Bookends, Hengrove Affordable Later Phases, and then in Section D, development programme which has not yet progressed. And if you go through all those projects, you will see there's no referral to Brislington Meadows.
Okay, thanks. So my sort of follow-up would be, if that development does go ahead, can we ensure that the commitment that was made by Homes England to hand over a third of those to us, can we say that we'll still try and hold them to that commitment?
Can I just say, Donald, I'll come in. I mean, obviously that's a matter of some debate recently, so clearly the administration has made its views clear, and it's also, subject to a potential forthcoming planning. So I think we wouldn't want to prejudice or confuse the public narrative. We keep a close eye on all sites, and as Donald has said, it's not a site that's currently anywhere near our pipeline. We think we've identified all of the sites that are credibly likely to come forward, which we would want to bring into the HRA in either in part or in full. And we're working, as you know, to a limited pot. So this is effectively all of the sites we currently have. The sites might change because obviously sites come and go. That's the nature of the business. But there's no discussion happening at this point about Brislington. As you know, it's a topic that does attract its fair share of comment, which I'm sure you'd realise we don't want to get embroiled in that here tonight.
And I'm lucky enough to be the councillor. Thank you.
John.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on reserves. We've got a reserve at the moment, a balance of £97.8 million. And obviously we're talking of using some of that capital reserve, but we seem to be talking about reducing it down to £21 million. Is that going to be okay? Or are we running some risks with that, do you think?
There's a question about the amount of reserves that we're going to run it down to, and it's 20 million. But actually, it's 20 and 10, isn't there? Because we were going to have two.
Do you want to answer?
Okay. Just to answer that question, the intention is to have two sets of reserves, one set of 20 and one set of 10 million. And the idea is that we will have an operating, enough for a year's operating and a major repairs reserve. So we have had this sense checked. We've been working with Savills to make sure that it's a prudential reserve.
And Councillor, draw your attention to Appendix 1, where you'll see the risks are identified in paragraph 7, and references also made to the capital reserves as well.
No, I can see that. My question is, are we confident that reducing the reserve from the current level, which is just under £100 million, down to 21 million, plus a little bit obviously in the major reserves in the repairs fund, are we entirely confident that's enough?
Can I perhaps comment that the acquisition by the HRA of sites to add to the portfolio is something which we don't actually have to make a long-term commitment to. So we will annually review our headroom, and there'll be no long-term commitment, because ultimately sites can be acquired or others can pick them up at fairly short notice. So we'll keep this under review.
Is it worthwhile just adding to that to just make reference to the capital strategy, and within the strategy it outlines a number of different metrics that we need to keep within to ensure that the HRA remains affordable. One of that is the interest cover ratio, a minimum level of reserves, and also the other areas that Donald's made reference to. All of the programme is balanced within those metrics.
Thank
Tony.
Yes, just a quick question which may help to clarify. We have a 30-year plan, a 5-year plan and a 1-year plan. And my understanding is that the 1-year plan allows us to review the metrics that we are setting in terms of whether we have enough reserves and so on as we go forward. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think you'll find some local authorities, particularly those with an active capital programme in the HRA, would describe a 30-year rolling plan. I think the idea is, having built this evidence base, now we would want to come back to it because it's a really solid piece of work. So it allows us to fairly quickly revisit the assumptions and do exactly what you've suggested.
Any further questions? Martin?
Yeah, thank you. I know, well, it's been said already, we're dependent on government offering funds, asking for bids. We have to have bids ready and rush them in. So in terms of the council housing decarbonisation, I understand we've bid to the social housing decarbonisation fund that exists, but we don't know that will exist subsequent years. It doesn't help us sort of plan a programme, does it? So are there any other proposals to continue the decarbonisation in line with the target, which I understand the interim target is to get to rating of C for all the properties, or substantially all the properties?
I'll respond to that, Councillor, if I may. Within the HRA business plan, there are £80 million has been set aside for investment in, to use a vernacular phrase, retrofit. In other words, to make them more energy efficient and reduce the carbon footprint. There's also a pilot involved for 25 easy find properties, which are system built properties from the 60s and 70s. And the total investment being proposed within the HRA business plan will amount to 97 million. And as the councillor has said, the target is indeed to reach EPC C rating by 2030. The pilot for 25 properties, we hope to achieve EPC rating of A. I also wish to use, subject to members and many more discussions, to utilise the fact that Bristol is making such a significant investment to appeal to central government to go beyond match funding, to offer match funding to begin with, but given that this is a national issue that no local authority can resolve on its own, I think Bristol is actually putting its money where its mouth is, where it has those funds available. And I think it's worth noting that in addition to energy efficiency and what may or may not come out of the partnership in terms of electricity supplies and resources as they shift and change, our programme has already delivered £42 million worth of investment in retrofit, including the replacement of 6,500 gas boilers. But there's no doubt it's a massive ambition for the whole country, and the only national assessment available to us is one produced by Savills that estimates that for every social home across the country that would require £20,000 minimum investment. That's before inflation, and in Bristol's situation that would translate into £549 million. So what we're doing is doing what we can and be constantly alert to grant bidding, which we've submitted one grant, as you've just said, but any other revenue streams that come up that we can bid for, or capital resources, we will do so. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, Zoe.
Yeah, have we also looked into you know, potential for green bonds and things like that, because there might be people in the city that are interested in doing that.
Well, so not specifically in the HRA, but it is something that we're looking at. Obviously, you'll know we had a manifesto commitment to a Bristol bond. Nicola is exploring the concepts of a green bond. I don't know if Denise has done some work on that. Denise, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yes, we have. We have done some initial work in terms of the potential cost associated and potential process for adopting a green bond, and also working with core cities in terms of other approaches as well in terms of financing. It's not built into the programme at the moment. There is still a lot of work that would need to be done before taking the proposition forward.
But it's an active conversation, though. It is happening. Nicola's pushing it.
David.
Looking at Appendix A3 and the sites approved to planning construction anticipated over the next 5 years, I would be expecting to see a site in Lockleys called Dovercourt on that list, and it's not. Because it's going to planning this week. Is it down there under a different name?
Is that a Gorham?
It is a Gorham site.
Gorham
I'm just
site.
trying to remember, Councillor Wilcox, where the conversations are. We'll come back to you on that. It's a good question. Not entirely sure. There may be a good reason why it's not in the HRA plan. I can't think of one, so we'll come back to you with a
Thank
response.
You.
Right, members, can I just ask a question? Moment, looking at our timing, we might manage to complete everything by 7 o'clock, but we might not. And Craig, I think you said you had to leave at 7, so it's only a question of whether it's more appropriate to move on to the section on reserves while you were here, Craig. Is that might be something you'd have more input in than growth and regen, or maybe you'd prefer that you left it to officers to deal with. I don't know.
Well, I have interests in both those things, so I'm happy to. I'll be here till 7. If you get everything covered, then there's no reason to adjust your order.
So,
I don't think.
So we'll carry on with the existing order. Okay, fine. But I didn't want you to miss out.
Oh, thank you. Everyone loves a conversation about reserves.
Sorry. Yeah, Joe's just prompting me, members, in terms of how we summarise the points we are discussing. I'm of the view that given this is so varied, that the easiest thing may be if you and I with Heather look at the notes after the meeting and try and produce a summary in time for the second half of this meeting. Members happy with that? Because I think to try and summarise such varied discussions off the cuff is likely to be beyond my capabilities, and I think that might be a better way. So if you're happy, we'll do that and try and get a draft of the first half out to you before we reassemble. Okay, so the next item then is the growth and regen budget. We've already had responses from Stephen and his team to our initial questions. So, members, it's over to you to fire away. And I'm guessing David might want to be first as Chair of Growth and Regen. Yeah, so if you'd like to lead with your questions, David. I can't hear you.
So I thought we were covering those in the capital area. My apologies.
Well, let's take other questions then from others while you're gathering your thoughts. Anybody else? Martin.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at there are a whole load of highways related ones, so that kind of starts to focus on that maybe. One of the lines suggests that in year one only, £100,000 would be saved, which is to carry out a review of parking spaces for disabled people, to review the usage and provision of disabled people's parking spaces, and introduce a charge for the service, which I suspect might be a sort of full cost recovery type charge. So to receive the application, to plot the space to build it, and then bill the person requiring that space. Is that, I mean, it's only shown for 1 year, and it's shown as £100,000. How many spaces are likely to be charged for in that year, and would it then end? Or is it a pilot, or what will people be paying for their space? Which incidentally isn't just for use by them, it's available for use by anyone with a blue badge can use a disabled parking place.
Yep, Mike?
I can see Councillor Alexander wants to come in, but I think there's just a general point about how the budget is presented. So when a saving is shown, it is a recurring saving. So because it's made in a year, it's then in the base budget. So the assumption is that's a 100k saving forever, effectively, Martin. It was only if we were then going to make further savings would it reappear. I'll hand over to Councillor Alexander, but it's a much broader review of charging for disabled parking. It's not specifically about parking. Specific parking base is my understanding, but Don.
Do you understand, Martin, the accounting point, which is that we hope to save that amount every year? Yeah, okay. So the changes, we've got to consult on them, but one of the things, for instance, we're looking at is at the moment we paint courtesy parking bays outside people's houses. We don't charge for that at the moment. Some authorities do charge for that. We also don't always do it very efficiently because actually we don't have the money to do it really. So the question is, can we look at that and make it something? I would prefer to see it on a more of a contractual basis whereby we make a reasonable charge and our commitment is then to actually do it within a certain time rather than to see how it goes, which is a little bit where we are at the moment. And also, it's not necessarily true that everyone who needs a parking bay, or in fact who is disabled, is poor. There are many people who are disabled who are in high-flying jobs, good incomes, and I think we need to look at it in a more granular way and hopefully save some money. Because actually there are other things like pavements that we aren't always doing very well because we're short of money, and those are really important to people with disabilities as well.
Thank you. Could I just get clarification? So there is a charge in some authorities. It would be useful to know what that is. And secondly, are you suggesting this is a means-tested charge that would apply in Bristol if it only applies to people who are not in those better paid jobs?
Well, we already don't do it in every case. For instance, if someone has got off-road parking, we won't do a bay. We also don't do it where we judge there to be reasonable parking opportunities in the street already. So we do run it through those kind of filters to ascertain whether it's really necessary. So it seems reasonable as well to look at whether a person can afford to pay for it so that it frees up more money in a sense for those who can't. But we will consult on it. We haven't decided on the detail yet. We will talk to people, and especially disability groups, about that.
Could you say what these charges in other authorities are?
I think North Somerset is £150, which would still be less than cost, actually, because it does require a person going out and looking at the safety issues of it as well. So actually, the figure I've heard quoted is about £500 per bay. It's quite a lot of money, which could actually be sorting out paving slabs and other things that are, you know, important to people with other disabilities.
Okay, so it could be up to £500, but maybe not, and there could be
I
other
didn't say,
charges
I didn't
as
say
well.
it could
from
be
what
up
was
to £500. What I said was that I've heard that the cost is around £500.
the full cost.
I can't confirm that, but I'm not proposing that we suggest that it would be £500.
Okay, no, I understand that. You said maybe 150, but you also
No,
said...
I said what I said was that North Somerset charge.
Yeah.
I think it's 150 or 133. I did some benchmarking marking on their website.
Okay, but there could be other charges as well, from what was said earlier?
Oh, there could well be, yes. We need to look at all of our parking costs, partly because we have a policy to try to reduce the attractiveness of the use of the car. So I'm very, very open to that. We also haven't raised parking charges for a very, very long time. Some of them for almost 10 years. RPZs as well. So, and to be brutally honest, we desperately need the money for other good things in transport.
Yes, sorry. The second point, I might have been misunderstood. The comment at the that was first made was other charges for disabled people's parking, not just the space outside a house. So there might be additional charges.
We will go out to consultation on that.
Okay.
I think yes.
Okay. And there would be,
as I said, the assumption that people who are disabled are poor, I think, is incorrect. Many disabled people, quite rightly, are in high-flying jobs with good income, and I think we need to face that that kind of challenge to our ongoing thinking.
Sure. It says this would be this is one of the subject to consultation. So there will be a full equalities impact assessment, I assume.
Yes, yes, certainly, and I will talk to disabilities groups particularly, but I will also make the point that there's money that could be used for other things, because we are letting down disabled people in other areas. If you walk up and down Park Street on those rocking flagstones at the moment, you can see that that's not safe for sometimes able-bodied people. So we need to be realistic about the financial side of transport. Income from government has gone down and down over 10 years now.
John.
Thank you, Chair. Don, I wonder if I could just press you a little bit harder. I've got two questions. The first one is, you must have an idea of how much you're going to be charging the disabled for the parking bays.
No, it's not been discussed.
So we're going to go out to consultation with a question mark figure?
No, this was, all the budget papers were set quite quickly, as has been reported already. And it's something we need to discuss. But I would like to do a wider benchmarking exercise, looking at other local authorities and seeing what they're charging.
Okay, so you won't be drawn on that. On the
no,
second...
but I would be drawn on the fact that I don't think we're doing it very well at the moment, because we don't have the money. So I'm not happy that the status quo is good for disabled people. So we need to look at what will actually work.
Okay. On the wider point, you mentioned the fact that some disabled people may or may not be in work and all sorts of things, but for many disabled people, the car is a lifeline. They can't actually use public transport, they can't cycle, they can't walk. The car is their lifeline. So you're now saying we're going to be charging lots of parking fees for the disabled? Did I hear that correctly, or is that a misassumption?
No, that's words from your mouth, John. We'll not be charging lots of parking fees for disabled people. We'll be talking to disabilities groups. As I said, we're already letting down some people with disabilities with the standards of our maintenance.
I'm confused now. So are we going to be charging the disabled to park in Bristol? Yes or no?
No decision has been made. It is in the budget in principle.
So in principle, we are going to be charging the disabled to park in Bristol.
In principle, we will be charging disabled people, but we will be consulting on that, and the consultation is absolutely genuine, and I've not had a discussion with...
Well, I'd like it recorded on the minutes that I'm appalled by that suggestion.
Heather?
So, final point on this, because the saving proposes that the cost of installing bays would be covered. So that seems, the saving seems to suggest that it costs £100,000 a year to install the disabled bays, and that would be covered by those using it. So in terms of not knowing how much that would cost per bay, if we know how much it currently costs per year, I would hope that there's a figure somewhere of how many bays were installed last year, which isn't to say I expect you to have the answer now, but just from the information in the equalities impact, it seems that that information of how much each bay costs, and therefore how much would be charged, because it says it would be to get back the money, it implies all of the money for those bays. It seems that that information should, I'm not suggesting you should have it now, but it does seem that that information is there from what's in the equalities impact.
I think that I could get the information, yes, but I don't have it to hand, as you say.
Don, on parking issues, and I understand the proposal to charge in what are currently free car parks, and to remove the half-hour free parking in parking zones. But there seems to be a great reluctance on the part of the authority to even consider parking zones in areas where there is increasing demand. So on the one hand, we're looking to charge people within their communities for parking, but we're not looking to provide the parking zones which could actually provide support for communities that currently feel overwhelmed by commuters who are taking the spaces outside of their houses. And am I right in that understanding? And could we not consider parking zones as an alternative to charging for the already existing free car parks? I'm just not quite sure of what message we're trying to give.
I don't think that the parking zones have always been very lucrative financially. We haven't actually put the prices up in the RPZs for a long time. That's why I have just done that, came through Cabinet a while ago. But there's a point of principle in that, there's a practical point in that they aren't always popular. They're popular with the people who would like them, but they're not popular with the area next to them because of their shifting of the parking problem from one area to the next. And there is a point of principle in that we actually want to reduce the attractiveness of the car in the city, and providing a parking space that, for instance, in Clifton, 13 pence a day for a parking space. It seems a bizarre way to reduce the attractiveness of the car in Bristol. So I think we have a principled problem with them. And also, I don't think financially they have solved our problems. We will be looking at the car parks. I mean, I've got 3 of those free car parks in my ward. We need to talk to local businesses about them, because there are situations in which they are an important part of local and already struggling high streets. But I've got one in my ward that, frankly, is just a source of antisocial behaviour, and it really is time that we looked at all of these car parks and we made some decisions as to how we can make money from them, but obviously not wanting to have negative impacts on local shops where we're already putting money in from other hands that we don't want to, take it from one.
But there are a number of issues out of what you've said there, Don, and certainly I understand the issue of the areas neighbouring the parking zones, because those are the very areas I have where residents cannot park for their neighbours from the parking zone parking in front of their houses, and the commuters parking in front of their houses in the first area they can get to where they are allowed to park. And that is absolutely destroying our communities and putting really, really unnecessary pressures on both disabled drivers and on young families where there are problems in actually dealing with the family and parking the car because they end up having to park so far away from where they live. So there are really significant issues there which we are not dealing with. And this is a very personal plea, but if you really, really, really must go against the pledge that was given in parking zones of the half-hour free parking, can you not consider increasing the parking charge for the remaining period of time in that parking zone, but leave the half-hour free for those who are visiting, are using the shops who actually need their passing trade? Could we not look at structuring that in a way that was a much fairer recognition without creating more pressures on local independent traders who, to be honest, are suffering more than many businesses at the moment?
Simple answer, yes, that's the kind of suggestion I would like, providing at the end of the day we get the revenue that we need to produce a modern transport infrastructure for the city which focuses on active travel, public transport, and less on the internal combustion engine.
Okay, so if members will bear with me just for a moment, if I move on to a different tack, at some stage, relatively recently, you did a really positive marketing of livable neighbourhoods. I find myself looking at a situation where what a livable neighbourhood could deliver is something that I suspect every member would like to see in their ward. But what I see instead is different schemes looking at doing different things to local parts, to roads through my ward and neighbouring wards, which don't actually help to make the area more livable for the residents who live in it. And I would like to see that we had a sensible plan that looked at the capital spends that are available through the different packages being channeled to help make our neighbourhoods more livable. At the moment, a large amount of what we're doing is designed to make them more usable by commuters, not by the people who live in them. And so it is just a plea of could we actually be looking at developing a strategy that really is for the residents of the wards where the neighbourhoods need to be made livable, not for those who often live outside the city and choose to come in and use our residential streets to park on.
I think, well, you are there confusing actually our treatment of our strategic corridors, one of which I recognise goes through your ward, and our treatment of neighbourhoods. So those strategic corridors are clearly identified in our transport plans as being roads on which we want to produce much better bus segregation and active travel segregation, and that's going to require a lot of work. Our livable neighbourhoods will be operated not on the strategic corridors, but in the areas between the strategic corridors. And I think every councillor should know which roads in their ward are in fact strategic corridors. Have long been identified as such and were probably called arterial roads before that, and which are neighbourhood streets, and not expect a livable neighbourhood to be built across the strategic corridor that, for instance, in the case of your ward, is actually going to have thousands of cars coming through from Cribs Patchway, and certainly is not amenable to a livable neighbourhood strategy.
But the residential roads are absolutely attached to and run between those strategic corridors. And if we are coming up with proposals that divert traffic and block roads, that is going to put significantly more traffic on our residential roads. And that does not make the neighbourhood livable. So that is why I think we really do need a joined up policy. But anyway, I'm digressing.
I think if I may comment on that, Jeff, the intention is clearly there to do the opposite. In fact, the recent discussion over the bus lane in Henbury, I resisted Councillor Weston's desire to remove that. One of the reasons was it would let the traffic coming down the road from Cribbs Patchway straight into Henbury and do exactly what you are concerned about. So when we clearly, when we're clear about what are our strategic corridors and what are our livable neighbourhoods, and don't confuse the two, we are able to do that, I believe.
Yeah, but I would just say, Don, but there is a danger of confusing the two, because if you do something to the corridor that impacts on the roads completely adjoining it, that is to the detriment of the neighbourhood, and therefore that's why I'm asking that the two should be looked at in parallel, not as separate pieces of work. But I've taken too much time on this particular issue. David, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, and I'm glad I didn't come in straight away, because it's posed some more interesting questions. So I'd like to ask a direct question of the Cabinet Member of Transport. Would he welcome budget amendments to increase the number of residence parking zones in Bristol?
To
increase the number of residence parking zones in Bristol?
Well, of course, they all have to go to consultation, so it may well be wasted money. Every residence parking
Indeed, but would you welcome them?
Would I welcome them? I'm not sure I would, really. It's not just about the capital money, it's actually about the resource to do them, because it's incredibly resource intensive. And we were going through our programme yesterday, and it is, we've just got too much stuff on in transport. I mean, CAS is massive. The A384017 is massive, 15 kilometres. Loads of other capital programmes going on. I really don't see how we could accommodate yet more residence parking zones at the moment.
Thank you. So let's start talking about libraries. There's, which is the option? I can't find it now. There's an item about reducing the non-staffing budgets, which includes the purchase of books, GRO 003. Does that mean that the libraries will not be purchasing any more books? Could you clarify that, please?
So the Library Material Fund is currently £560,000. So this proposal would see it reduced to 510,000.
Right. So we'd still be purchasing books. Good. There was a... Oh yes, the energy repurposing budget. Where did I see that? Was which one is it? Sorry, I can't see this one. Sorry, bear with me. Oh, the Reprocure Energy Budget, G050. Is that to do with the sleeved programme budget that was talked about at Cabinet last week? And are we actually going to be saving money considering the number of the energy costs at the moment?
So energy costs are factored into the budget already. The expectation that they will rise, I think, £7 million, I think, next year. So that's already kind of consumed within the budget. I'm not sure what the line was you were referring to. What was it again? Sorry.
GR 050.
And that's in the capital, capital programme, yeah.
Let's have a look. GR 50.
Glad I'm not the only person having problems reading this table. It's on the second page, about a third, halfway up.
David, could you just give the reference number again?
GR 050. It's a saving of 150,000.
Sorry, I was looking at the capital programme, that was why.
The short answer is yes, you're correct. It relates to the reprocurement and it was alluded to in the previous cabinet paper.
So my question is, where is this saving? Because it's a new innovative way of actually procuring energy that might not actually save us money.
So I mean, along with a number of these proposals, we have to go away and do the work and prove the case. Obviously, that's the intention, and the indication we've had is the sleeving approach can deliver efficiencies, but that's against a rising market. So obviously, we need to be able to distinguish between savings and the underlying cost of energy, which is obviously quite confusing, and why we need to be able to differentiate between the two things. But on a like-for-like basis, the sleeving approach does seem to generate some significant opportunities. We've been talking to others who've used it, and it does seem to do the job.
And one final one, IN27. Bristol City Council's energy services committed to making Bristol a carbon neutral city by 2050. Shouldn't that be 2030? Thank you. That concludes my questioning. Yeah.
Can you just make sure that Craig has the page reference that needs amending?
IN27. To the bottom of the second page. Page 108 of the Cabinet Notes.
Any other questions? Mark, and then Tim.
Thanks, Chair. Could I add my support for retaining the 30-minute free parking? It may seem to be a very small measure. Indeed, it's one that I bought in some time ago. But it does support local shops, and local shops will tell you that. I do appreciate the budget pressure. I think with some reconfiguration of other charges, you could make up the difference. The issue is always around churn and persuading motorists not to park, taking up retail bays for far too long. So I think you could skew the charges to encourage a shorter stay. But I think it has made a difference, particularly to some of the marginal retail streets, particularly those in my patch. So I would like to encourage you to keep it. I have a question about GR006, capitalised project. Is this just in relation to one project or indeed overall? Because I thought we already do capitalise some aspects of the capital programme.
Yeah, absolutely we do. I think it was just to say we could probably do more.
Okay, so is it across the board or a particular project?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure which line you're referring to. I'm lost in the document.
Yeah,
but yes.
I'm just looking at this chart, savings proposals.
Yeah.
And it's GR006.
Yeah.
It's not an easy table to actually read, I have to say.
Right, yeah, so that's just to be even more clever than we currently are with how we use
right, okay.
capital line capital.
Thanks. That's it.
Tim and then Martin.
Yeah. I have to confess I'm losing track a bit of what we're discussing, whether we're discussing... it's all right for me to discuss revenue savings. At this point, we're not just... Yeah. There's so many papers. I wanted to ask about the Future Parks programme and the levels of income that we are looking to achieve from that, and whether we think that that is, is that a high estimate, a medium estimate, a low estimate? What's our confidence of achieving those kinds of revenues?
So just to confirm, we're talking GR0221 and the 25,000, I believe. I think it's a very achievable estimate. I think there will be potentially more to come. What we have is business cases, that will need to be developed. So this is what's been an immediate ask and offer from the service in light, as we've all heard, of a pretty accelerated process. So in the longer term, I think there will be more opportunities. There are clearly themes in this budget around being more business-like, and in the parks, with the future parks, we have an opportunity to hear what organisations themselves can bring forward as ideas. So I think this is eminently achievable, and it's clearly at the low end of what we'd expect to get in the long term.
Okay, thank you. The other question I wanted to ask, also about parks, but sadly also about parking. In the review that we're going to undertake about charges for car parking in our parks, will we, as part of that review, will we look at public transport options to get to those places? Because the one thing that I really wouldn't want to see us doing is just increasing the number of people who have to make journeys by car, because public transport's not available. Although I think I've phrased that wrongly. Yeah, if we put, what I'm trying to say is, if we put people who are on low incomes off coming to parks because we're charging, and there is no public transport alternative, we will just be stopping them from going to parks. So will we be looking at public transport in that review? That's my question. Sorry.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I mean the list for parks that are potential for developing into car parks is quite long, but we've absolutely every expectation that list is going to be much shorter after we've done that scoping of feasibility, and things like if it's inaccessible by public transport, or if there's super steep roads that lead up to it, or if it has a traffic displacement issue, then that will all have a big part of whether that's feasible or not and implementable, and it will also be consulted on as well.
Thank you.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, it sort of joins up the two questions that Tim has just asked. In autumn 2019, council officers discussed a parking strategy that was coming, and I have the slides from that, and it hasn't yet happened. The absence of a parking strategy, to me, is at the root of an awful lot of this debate. While the debate is about finance and revenue raising, actually the underlying issue is, I don't think, I think the absence of a strategy is causing a problem. It's causing two-tier sort of areas of the city, those with a parking scheme, which we've just heard is going to try and make more money, and those without a parking scheme, where all the chaos will occur because of the money being made, or the threat of money being made, in the areas that do have a parking scheme. And I have a ward that has half of each. So I have one area of the ward which, like every part of Bristol with a parking scheme, was reviewed under the Mayor's first term pledge to review parking schemes, came out as one that was supported, like every single scheme was supported in majority by its residents. And the other part of the ward is the area where, since 2016, it's had problems. That chaos is getting worse. The dangers, the access for emergency vehicles, for council service vehicles, like refuse, ambulances, fire engines, all of those things, deliveries, blocking, corners where disabled, accessible routes are meant to exist, they get parked on. Some of the problems, and there are many more. So the absence of a strategy is causing this idea that we can make lots more money where we've got parking from whoever's using it, including the 30-minute issue, which does seem to be particularly perverse given the benefits of turnover by stopping commuters filling spaces all day. And then the impact on disabled people whom I think I heard might have to... and we did review future parks in a meeting of community scrutiny, which I chaired a few months ago. And the access to parks, the corridors to get to parks, if not by motor vehicle, was one of the issues. So we definitely welcome, I think, that debate. It's unfortunate you couldn't attend. That debate would have shown people are concerned about maintaining access to parks for the whole cross-section of the community, including those with sort of families and mobility issues and so on. So I hope we can have a strategy that will be put in place, but it doesn't seem to be planned now. It's sort of sunk without trace. And it's, to my mind, it's causing some of these problems and leading to this sort of two-tier kind of money-making versus sort of chaos areas of the city.
Don?
I mean, Martin's correct. We do need a parking strategy. And I'm asking for it so that all of this can be put into context. And that's part of the reason why a lot of it's so woolly, is actually we've had to prepare this budget very quickly. We've had to say how we're going to make it stack up. But the documentation that we really need in place to do it properly hasn't been done. So the parking strategy is on its way. And yes, as you note, Martin, RPZs can cause chaos next door, and consulting just the people who are going to benefit from them has been one of the problematic issues about them.
So it would be helpful to have a timescale for the strategy. And also, if we're going to depend more on income from parking schemes, I presume you're going to keep the areas where they are. So we do need a solution for the areas where they aren't, that are affected.
Yeah, I would like the parking strategy as soon as possible, but I have to accept that officers are really snowed under with work at the moment. I just can't keep, stamping my foot and asking for more things to be done.
Yeah, Heather, one last question before we move on.
Yeah, back onto parking. I'm just wondering if one of the considerations there is the routes to get to that parking. So Stoke Park was on that list. We just talked about strategic corridors and neighbourhood streets, and every road to Stoke Park is a neighbourhood street. It's a local residential road, so I guess my question is, where would a car park be that doesn't encourage traffic from across the city to go down neighbourhood streets, and is that considered when considering putting in car parks?
Well, I don't think Stoke Park's on the list actually, but the priority is the destination parks, Ashton Court and Blaze, and sorry, of course it is, and I use it regularly. Yeah, I'm a big fan. Yeah, well, there's a lot of hopefully good work coming towards Stoke Park soon. I'm very hopeful about that with our Heritage Lottery Fund bids and things. But in terms of the parks that we're thinking about mostly are the big ones that have been that need that resource to be put in, and there isn't the barriers that there are in some of the smaller ones or the ones with access issues, such as Stoke Park.
I would suggest Stoke Park would be a fantastic opportunity to have a destination park that doesn't rely on cars. And that is also the plan for all the work that is happening in Stoke Park. There is no space, there is no will for anyone to have a car park. But do you know it's the same distance from the city centre as the Downs, and it's as big as the Downs. So I think it is a destination park, but it is not appropriate to have parking there, or car park.
I absolutely agree. I'm a big fan, and as you're on that committee as well, watch this space. We'll see what happens with the. Okay, it's not formally on the list, but it's a very valued asset, obviously, and has a lot of potential, bags of potential.
All right, one more question, and then we will move on to reserves.
Thank you, Chair. GR008. I'm not sure it's worded properly. Use opportunities in it finishes, and increases income through enforcement action to fund a post. What opportunities and what post, please? Page 107 of the Cabinet Papers, GR008.
Appendix 1.
Yeah.
Detailed budget strategy by directorate, I think. Is that right?
Yes. Or directorate summary with savings is the one I'm looking at.
Well, Chair, while we're looking that up, there's quite a few. The formatting of that document does seem to have got issues, that it's not, the row height isn't high enough, so lots of different points are missing the second parts of them. Somebody's just shrunk the row height and it's just losing quite a lot. So some of them it still makes sense, and some of them you've got no idea what it's talking about.
Can I, Appendix 8 has the further details. We'll sort the formatting for that for full council, but if you go to Appendix 8, that's the full list of savings.
Can you sorry, I just searched the document for GR008 and it's only come up with one instance. How do I cross-reference it?
We'll sort the formatting out, because obviously, as you say, the bottom of the sentence has been dropped off.
So I think within Appendix 8 you have all of the detail savings that are listed there, and that's the one I think that we're all looking at, which will have the full detail. That's only then been summarised into the directorate.
I can't see the one. She's 60.
Can I suggest, David, you check to see if the answers are there? And
I have found it, I'm afraid. Yes, we'll get it. I think the full sentence is use opportunities in the Housing and Planning Act 2016 to offset a post in the regulation team, increasing income through enforcement action to fund a post. So it's within the Housing and Landlord Services, and it's a small change. But we will address the formatting issue.
Right, thank you. I propose that we move on to reserves. Members are happy with that. I'm not sure whether I can say that you can go at this point, Stephen, because there might be something to do with reserves relating to you, so I'm not quite sure on that. Denise, can I start with a question? I apologise, I should have given you notice of this in advance, and it's more to do with current reserves. But following the news regarding Together Energy, are there any potential claims or liabilities on the authority that may impact on our reserves position as they stand?
Apologies, yes, I have provided a response to the questions asked in terms of whether Together Energy will have any impact on the Council's accounts or finances, and the response is no. We concluded the transactions and there is nothing outstanding, so it shouldn't have an impact.
That was the answer I was hoping for, so that good, thank you. Right, so members, questions on reserves. Zoe?
Mine's not so much a question, just I'm getting quite lost about which document we're using at the moment for this. So.
At this stage, we are I have no idea which document I'm on, but there is a section in the papers, and let's see if we can point you in the right direction. I'm sure Heather can, because I know you've got questions on reserves. Would you?
It's section 15 of the Appendix A budget report. Section 15.
Which page is that on, Michael?
92.
Ah.
Actually, that might be the end of it, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so if you're on page 91, Zoe, the reserves are summarised between the different categories and the totals on the table that actually just runs onto the next page as well. So who would like to start questioning? Heather?
Considering since the budget was published, we've had more information on DSG. We've had an extra 2.7 million in DSG funding. Has that influenced the position on, in terms of the risk and the amount of reserves needed to be held, considering there is that extra funding, and will therefore impact the SEND deficit?
So for members that may not be aware, there has been an additional announcement by the ESFA of a further 2.69 million of funding for Bristol. I think 385 million was a totality that's been apportioned out. Within the announcement that came through, it was 2.69 for 22-23, but also some specific assumptions around the level of funding for future years, which differed from our own level of funding. So as a result, there needs to be a full analysis of the model to put those figures through, and then we'll come back with the final figure, which will be ready for council. So colleagues are currently running through. So, for example, we'd assumed 6% annual uplift. They've indicated it's going to be 5 and then 3. So we need to put all of those through the model and then come back with the final figure.
Do we know of other councils that are holding a quantity in reserves to, well, first of all, other councils that have similar amount of SEND deficit, and councils that are holding in general reserves to cover that SEND deficit?
I think I've sort of covered that partially in the responses to the questions. So each council will obviously take their own decisions in terms of how they are going to account for it, and the range of the deficits will be different. So we do have some analysis of deficits, but that was possibly now a year out of date. We need to wait for all of the final positions. Bristol's deficit has moved quite significantly in 1 year, so our position has changed, and where we are in that profile has changed significantly. In terms of the approach in relation to whether or not there are provisions made or earmarked reserves, what we've done is follow the guidance specifically and looked at all of the different things that are at play. There isn't just one element to think about. There's one in terms of the actual ability to utilise general fund resources to fund the deficit, and there's also the area to think about in terms of the ending of the statutory instrument and the need to have a provision of some sort at that point. So different authorities have taken different approach, but we don't have a definitive answer in terms of which ones are where now in terms of the scale of the deficits, and also what accounting treatment they have, where there are contingencies, provisions, etc. as part of that approach.
Anybody else? David?
A question, because I probably don't understand the process. I'm interested in the paragraph 1510. In accordance with the policy and reserves, some reserves are going to be clawed back or released. I'm interested in the 1.7 million from Gorham Homes and why they don't actually need the money, because they're quite behind on some of the house building programs, so I would expect them to need as much money as possible.
So just in terms of clarity around the process, so as a minimum, at least every year we'll do a detailed review of all of the reserves and earmarked reserves that we have, and then work through in terms of which ones potentially can be released, redirected and returned back to the general fund. We complete this exercise always as part of the budget, but sometimes throughout the course of the year. So we have done that exercise and identified those that can be potentially released. Now, in terms of Gorham Homes have slightly different funding arrangements in terms of their loans and working capitals. As part of the Pipeline 1 project, we had identified up to £10 million of investment, potential investments that could be drawn down when Gorham go through that process, they agree the actual totality of what is going to be required to take those developments forward and identify what funds they believe they are going to need to take those projects. They've indicated that 1.7 million of the funding that we had identified for Pipeline 1 isn't going to be required and therefore can be released and redirected. We do have other funding for Pipeline 2 that's already been outlined for Gorham, and should we need to consider future investments, then again those propositions will come forward. If you note Appendix 9, which will have all of the loan and long-term arrangements with all of our subsidiaries, and the arrangements with Gorham will be outlined within that paper, so giving a bit more detail in terms of how the pipeline funding works and working capital loan arrangements work.
Thank you, Denise.
Anybody else? Tim, are you wanting to come in? No? Heather?
You know I can keep going on reserves. As you know, we are in a cautious position with reserves, and I understand there's many risk factors that are considered in that, and I'm wondering if there's any specific risk factors around the council's businesses or businesses that we're related to that have an impact on our reserves.
Sorry, Councillor Mack, I didn't understand the question. Do you want to just repeat it? Which aspect?
Yeah, any of the council's businesses or our subsidiary businesses that there are risk factors around that have a relation on holding an amount of reserves?
So we will always sort of consider the particular company and also, or even our capital programme and the level of contingencies and reserves that we need to be able to support those long-term investments and also any potential risk exposure. We have within our earmarked reserves some specifics that are aligned to finalising the arrangements that we currently have in place in terms of the BE 2020 Bristol Energy, because we still have the tail of that funding that's basically already set aside and earmarked. We also have within our reserves the pipeline for Gorham, etc. as well. That's already also in our reserves, even though they haven't drawn down those funds as yet. So a lot of the funds that we have earmarked are held based on commitments that we have made and contracts that we have entered into. And then there may be other risks that we need to ensure that we have sufficient to be able to cover, and some of that is captured in the risk matrix, where we sort of outline which are the risks that we think we're exposed to, whether that's a risk that needs to be managed, whether there's a contingency, or should those risks materialise, whether they would need to be funded from our general reserve, and that's also captured as well.
And in terms of, there will be an extra 3 million going into the City Leap reserve, and I was trying to understand the decision-making process. So when, the money is going to reserve, but does that go to Cabinet? Where's the sort of decision and the, I guess, the explanation of that money?
Yes, so what we have done is we've identified within the recent report that went through to Cabinet of sufficient funding to be able to take it through to completion of the procurement. We recognise that should there be a successful outcome, there will be a need within our budgets to be able to have some implementation costs, etc. So what we have done as part of that is try and ensure that there is a provision so that should a decision be made to move forward, that doesn't then destabilise the budget in trying to find a resource to be able to take that forward. So there will be a full report that comes to Cabinet as part of the City League process. Anything that's drawn down will be subject to full transparency, proper business cases, and a request that then comes through the relevant programme. We don't have a final figure, that was still moving, so again it's just an indicative to be able to ensure that we're able to move forward positively.
Okay, if there's no one else, then I will bring this meeting to a stage where we adjourn it. But just before I do, members, thank you. There's probably never an easy time to discuss budget, and I'm not sure 5 o'clock at night is the best time to start. But thank you for your contributions. But can I also, on your behalf, just thank Don and Ellie and Craig in his absence for your time. Do appreciate you being with us for the whole of this session. It's really helpful to us to have executive members present and sharing thoughts with us. And Mike, Stephen, Denise, Michael and Glenn, thank you for your contributions to our deliberations. And at least, Stephen, we can let you off for next meeting. So that's something to be thankful for. Following our agreement, we now adjourn this meeting until 3 o'clock on 3:30 next Tuesday. Thank you for your time.